Hey, this is Pamela Riemenschneider. I'm the retail editor for Blue Book Services, and I have Anna Marie here from 210 Analytics, and we're going to cover some of the latest numbers for COVID consumer trends in the retail produce departments. And we've kind of got a good idea of how much of a bump we're going to see as a normal bump due to, consumers buying more at the grocery store. It's hovering around 10%. So
yeah.
What are some of the bigger trends that we can infer now, rather than just looking at, oranges are up 19% this week? What else can we see when we now that we have a decent line and some decent numbers to really dig into?
Yeah, so it's been very interesting. The first few months of the pandemic, we saw these wild swings up and then kind of it coming down, and we had a whole number of holidays, so they really affected how the numbers stacked up. Well, the beauty of the last few weeks was that we had a stretch of 8 everyday weeks in between Independence Day and Labor Day. So those 8 weeks really allowed us to look at what is that everyday demand and where does it sit. And to your point, I think we're looking at a new baseline here, a new normal, if you want to call it that. So on the veg side, I would say we're trending about 14% above last year. So vegetables have done really well throughout the pandemic. And then on fruit, we've seen much more of an up and down performance, depending on how summer fruits did, how some of the other fruits, the big powerhouses, the surprises, as you mentioned, oranges. So that one is up and down a little bit more, but it seems to be riding, I would say, between 6 and 8% above last year. So that averages out at about 10%. Now, what I thought was fascinating, we've been reporting on the where do we sit, how much. What we've not looked at is who and why is this happening. So IRI provided some panel data this week. And what that looks at is how many buyers that we have and how did that change? How many trips did people take, product trips, so produce trips, as well as how much was in the basket, so the size of the basket. So ultimately, whether you're selling candy or produce, it doesn't matter. There's always 3 ways of growing a category. Get more people to buy it, so more buyers. Get people to buy it more often, frequency. Get people to spend more, either by buying more items in general or by buying more premium items. So those are the 3 areas. When we look at fruit versus vegetables, we see that fruit did increase the number of fruit trips as well as the size of the fruit basket, but not by far as much as vegetables. Additionally, fresh fruit lost some buyers compared to the same period in 2019, and vegetables gained on all those levers of growth. So they had more vegetable buyers. People were spending significantly more. I'm going to look at my other screen here for a second. So there were 10% more vegetable trips, so trips to the store that included fresh vegetables. There were 18% more dollars per trip in vegetables versus just 9% more dollars in fruit. And the spending per trip up 7.3%. So huge increases for vegetables across all measures, fruit not as much. So that really shows us that enormous power that vegetables have shown throughout the pandemic versus fruit throughout.
I think it really, as you're talking about this, like the light bulbs are going on in my head, because I'm seeing what consumers are thinking. Because pre-pandemic, what was the most common meal eaten outside of the home? It would be lunch for kids and dinner. And those are the meals that usually are more vegetable based. You buy more onions, you buy more lettuce, you buy more potatoes to make these dinners at home. When we talk about fruit is something that you always buy regardless of, it's always on your list, but not a specific variety, right? You need that fruit for snacking. In our house, it's always a certain type of apple, and then whatever's in season. That's basically, like right now we've been going through cantaloupes like crazy because it's a great time of year to eat cantaloupes. Especially from Pecos. So that's kind of a Texas thing. So it makes sense to me that we see more people buying more vegetables because they're not eating those at restaurants. They're cooking their own dinner.
Yeah.
And then we talk about breakfast, and breakfast stays pretty much the same. There's not a lot of people are eating, Brussels sprout hash for breakfast. You're eating a bowl of cereal or some yogurt with some fruit on it, hopefully, or maybe a smoothie. That's all staying pretty much baseline to me. Maybe you're buying more bacon if you want to eat an indulgent breakfast. But the dinner game, everyone has really had to step up their dinner game because we're not going out to restaurants as much as we were before. Or if you're like my family, they kind of rotate between chicken fingers and tacos. So that's pretty much been our dining out. And that's where I'm seeing the shift toward more vegetables.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think dinner is absolutely key to this, in addition to lunch, probably, especially people that work outside the home, people that were maybe eating a quick lunch out in a restaurant or grab and go from retail food service. All those options are off the table. So again, there we probably see a lot of different salads and those types of things. So the fact that it was mostly lunch and dinners that were affected, I can see absolutely that affecting vegetables more favorably than fruit. And then the change in buyers. Now, those were very, very small. Vegetables had a 0.2% increase in buyers. And that is because we're already looking at 97.5% penetration. Yeah. So there's really only so much we can improve there. And then there was a small drop for fruit, minus 0.3%. So again, those are not big shifts. And that just might have to do with the fact that some people really want to pick out fruit in person and are now ordering online. Maybe they switch to frozen fruit or something like that. But again, those are very small differences compared to the number of trips increasing and the average basket size increasing.
And I think that we're going to see these trends continue over the next couple of months. We did have a mention in the analysis piece that you wrote of school lunches and kids going back to school, but also virtual school. My kids are virtually at home right now, which means that they stand in the kitchen and lob orders at my mother. Today I want to have spaghetti for lunch instead of it being a sandwich thrown together kind of thing. That's certainly affecting how consumers are buying, but we will see those trends shift over the next couple of months. But I don't really see people going back to restaurants en masse, especially in person, for at least another couple of months until we see some of these, infection rates go down and people get a little less scared of doing that. So this baseline, this new normal, I think is something that we can use to project over the next couple of weeks into months for sure.
Yeah, and I love your comment on back to school. The IRI survey actually showed now that 57%, I believe it was, of parents with younger kids ages 6 to 12 said their kids were doing virtual schooling versus other options, be it hybrid, be it in person. And it was 52% of parents with older children ages 13 to 17. So we are looking at about half of kids at a minimum being home. So those trend lines that are starting back up either in August or September, depending on your district, now we're looking to see a lot of those dollars for snackable items or items you would put in a lunchbox. They are now going to still be at home dollars for 50%. Versus moving back to food service for some of people that would get school lunches or buy school lunches. So I do think it might affect the trend lines a little bit depending on the type of item.
We also have just kind of some fun numbers because over the last couple of months, we've watched, I particularly have really enjoyed watching oranges and how crazy their numbers are. And you put together, there's some analysis on the top 10 absolute dollar gains. And we see, of course, in the top 5, it's berries, lettuce, potatoes, tomatoes. But then we have the kind of 3 that are a little bit of shockers or just kind of unexpected winners in COVID spending. What are those?
So to real quickly clarify, what we did is we looked at what were the new additional dollars that happened versus a year ago. And to your point, if you look at the big categories, it's of course easier for them, even on the growth rate of 5 or 10%, to have a huge amount of additional dollars. So the unexpected ones to me were ones that are kind of small in sales and yet managed to be in the top 10 of the absolute dollar growth. And those were oranges, cherries, and mushrooms. And it's interesting because we have been talking about the enormous power of oranges during the pandemic. We've talked a time or two about mushrooms at retail. That's important to mention. And then, of course, cherries did not have a good year last year, but a fantastic season this year. So those are all areas where, from a dollar perspective, you would not expect them to be in the absolute dollar growth top 10, but here they are.
Yeah, and it's important to mention, like you said, the mushroom dollars, mushrooms are really a heavy food service item. So to see these gains at retail may make us celebrate, wow, everyone's loving mushrooms, but part of that is that the food service sector, I mean, is so down in when it comes to mushrooms, that to see this 20% year-to-date increase in mushrooms at retail is great, but it's not, you know, the best thing ever for growers, for example. Cherries are 29.6% up in absolute dollar gains, but it's oranges that just make me smile to see that the absolute dollar gains for oranges were 34.8%, and that equated to 235 million new dollars for oranges in what is generally the end and to off season of oranges.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, we have to keep in mind, this is during the pandemic. So these numbers that we looked at were from March 15 through August 16. So it's really off season, or the very, very end of the orange season. So the fact that they are number 5 in the top 10 of absolute dollar gains is it's astounding.
It's astounding. And of course, all of the orange importers for offshore oranges, which is Southern Hemisphere, are probably really happy about how the last couple of months have gone. So we're going to wrap it up here and check in again over the next couple of weeks to see how our baseline is doing. So thanks again, Anne Marie. I appreciate the analysis.